Hello, kia ora, vanakkam. You are watching Sarah in Between. My name is Sarah and I am a second generation Kiwi-Indian living here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And on this channel, we talk about what it is to be a woman of color, a woman of culture, and how faith can inform our specific stories, our journeys, and how we can find purpose in the in-between. Okay, so we're going to be talking about a huge part of Indian culture and Asian culture in general is weddings and marriages and all that comes with that topic. Now, I, as many third culture or first and second generationers living abroad got married in my hometown, in my home church where both my husband and I are from, in Chennai, South India. And I think a lot of my friends here in New Zealand assumed that my wedding was going to be, this week-long wedding and there's going to be dancing and loud music and a very popularized version of what a wedding in India looks like. But actually, my wedding was a very South Indian traditional Christian wedding and not so much a wedding that was kind of similar to the more northern parts of India and also traditional Hindu weddings. So today I would love to talk about 5 things that I loved about my Indian Christian wedding, about everything that was so bicultural about it, and how our faith can be intertwined with all of our cultural traditions and the things that we really enjoyed and loved doing and being a part of, and also 5 things that I really struggled with as a result of that. And so I hope you can relate to some of these, and I hope you can find some inspiration for your own wedding, or maybe see things differently if you have already had yours. Firstly, I want to talk about 5 things that I loved. So number one is that above everything else, our wedding was putting God at the center of every single thing that we did. And sometimes I really think about how people can do life without God and how people can do life without Jesus. How do people make decisions? How do they know what they should be doing? And having God in all of those smaller and also bigger decisions really had a huge impact on how things ran, because as someone who's grown up here and then has to navigate a more traditional or cultural space back home in India, it was really a difficult and challenging process, but what I loved about it is that God could be at the center of everything that we did, and he could be our point of reference, and we could go to him with anything and everything, especially if we're feeling really confused. And I can truly say that it was only by prayer and committing and surrendering everything to God that everything came together for his glory and not for our own, and we were able to make choices that were glorifying to him. Now, the second thing that I really loved about our Indian Christian wedding is that our marriage was in our home church. So when I was growing up in India, even after we had moved to New Zealand, we would return home for Christmas every year, and I would go to the same church, and that is where my husband and I met. That is where our parents met. That is where their parents before them were attending and had started going to church in this place. And so the beautiful part of it is that we were able to start our marriage in, first of all, the place of God, where the presence of God is, and also where our ancestors and our parents have walked their faith journey. And so it was beautiful to make our vows in a place like that, and it was really special for us and reminded us about how God weaves our stories together, because I grew up in New Zealand and my husband grew up in India, and if you think about it, actually, those 2 things shouldn't even make sense. Those 2 things shouldn't even have come together, but it is amazing the ways in which God works in our stories. If you're anything like me, I've had an idea about what I want to wear for my wedding since I was a little girl. I have drawn my wedding dresses. I have had Pinterest folders long before I even met my husband. And so those kind of decisions about what I wear and what the decorations look like and all these actually very seemingly insignificant things in the grander scheme of things was really, really important for me. And I was really lucky and blessed in that I was able to make my own decisions about it, and my husband and I were able to decide what we wear and how we do things and what decorations there are and what the invites look like. And it was really nice that there was no pressure or expectation in terms of these things. So I actually ended up wearing a Western gown or dress that was made for me in India, and then obviously I wore a lehenga for the reception, and then we had sort of 2 functions before and after the wedding, and I was able to wear a sari for those. So I really felt like I could express myself in all of the different identities and cultures that I have. And this was super, super special to me because fashion and what I wear is an expression of who I am. And who I am is bicultural. This has to be my favorite point, in that we were able to combine culture and faith really seamlessly, and I think Indian Christian weddings do this really well. We did have a few traditional points to our wedding, so we had sort of ceremonial functions that are actually technically traditionally quite Indian and Hindu ceremonies, but we conducted them as kind of a prayer meeting, as a blessing, as a way to honor both our culture and our faith. So we had our haldi function, or in South India we call it a nalangu, where my family members spread turmeric on my face and wish me well and bless me. And then also in our Maruvida function, we had a Palam Paramum function where we, my husband and I, had to feed each other milk and bananas. And the biggest thing was, at the core of it was Jesus, and an acknowledgement that God not only brought us together, but brought our cultures together and our stories, and that we could celebrate his authorship of that story in our hometowns with our family, where we have our roots. A huge part of our upbringing was traditional church music, and this is a huge part of our families and the church that we grew up in our home church in India. And you wouldn't actually expect church music at an Indian wedding, especially gospel choirs and hymns. And this was a huge part of our upbringing in India while I was still living in India as well. And having people from different generations and friends we hadn't seen in a long time, and all of the people that we grew up with, was really special, and everyone singing together. And we had our church choir and members from previous generations and previous choirs and other choirs in Chennai, and it was just really, really beautiful that they were able to be there, and we were able to worship God in that way, and we were able to honor him in that way. And a lot of it reminded us of our own parents' wedding and the music that made up so much of our upbringing and childhood. Moving on to all of the things that I struggled with, and I see a lot of Indian Christian people struggling with, especially if you've grown up in a foreign country, is that as someone who didn't grow up in India, I really had to navigate how to communicate with all of our vendors, all of the people on the ground, all of the people that were helping out. And don't get me wrong, India is a great place to do a wedding because there's someone to do pretty much anything that you can think of, but cross-cultural communication was really hard, and it wasn't, the things that I had in my mind were generally not things that people had seen before. And our wedding was the first one in both of our families as well, and so we kind of had to trailblaze a path of what that might look like. So for example, our families had never heard of a save the date or a pre-wedding shoot, or really westernized versions of how weddings run. And generally couples aren't even supposed to meet in the days leading up to the wedding, and there's supposed to be like a shyness when photos are being taken. But because my husband and I had been dating for a while before our wedding, we didn't really have any of that. And so this is something that many people in India didn't understand, and it was hard to get everyone on the same page. My advice advice and what worked for us was thinking about two things when making decisions or when coming across obstacles. One is what we are trying to do glorifying to God, or is it glorifying to us? Who is the glory going to go to, and who are we going to give the glory to once this decision has been made, or once this thing has been done, or once we choose a certain way forward? And two, is there actually a reason for doing it? Are we just doing it because everyone else is doing it? Are we doing it because someone has told us that it is something that should be done? And I think if you think about these two things, for most of the conflicts or challenges that you face, you will be able to find an answer that is true to you. In the same way, I think a lot of the times, because Indian weddings are so popular, it's easy to look at the influence of social media and the general conception of what an Indian wedding should look like and assume or think that your wedding has to look and feel exactly like that. And I actually really needed to take a good look at myself and my motives for doing the things that I was doing, because, for example, North Indian weddings, they often go on for days. There's music and dancing and games. And I knew that the way that things were done in South Indian weddings were a lot different to that, and a lot different to what I had seen growing up. And being a more conservative, more westernized way of doing things, I constantly had to ask myself, am I doing the things that I am doing because I have seen other people doing them, because I have seen reels or photos on social media of how fun things looked, and was I letting popular culture sort of influence the plans that God had for our wedding and what he wanted it to look like? And was I just doing things to make myself happy, or was I considering the perspective of others who were equally involved in the wedding? The more I asked myself that question, the more I cut down on the things that I wanted, the more I started taking a look at the things that actually mattered rather than the things that I was doing just for the sake of doing them, and just so that people would have a perception of how fun or amazing or wonderful the wedding was, instead of what God actually had in his mind. You know, we want the decorations, we want the outfits, the fancy wedding cards, and in many Indian cultures, there's a pressure to outdo one another in the greatest wedding possible and the most amazing wedding that you can throw, and honor is a lot of the times involved depending on the perceived success or failure of one's wedding. But if you think about it, what is it all for anyway? To make people happy that are probably going to talk badly about it anyway? Or is it for your own happiness, or just what you want and what you and your husband want? And that is why it is so important to make sure that we keep coming back to God as our compass and as our anchor point, because it's so easy to get carried away with cultural and societal pressures, and we forget that actually God can do a lot more with less. Another source of pressure or expectation that I see a lot of third culture kids facing when they get married in their own culture, in their hometowns, or actually in the countries that they grew up in, is a family pressure or expectation. And so in most Indian households, marriage is a really family affair, and in our kind of collectivist culture, the perceived success or failure of a wedding is tied to honor, as we talked about before. And so everyone is kind of functioning at a certain level of anxiety, especially if your wedding is geared more towards a traditional way of doing things. And guest lists can be as long as the top of New Zealand till the bottom of it, or even longer. And, you know, dowry is still actually expected and is very prevalent in many marriages in India still today, and we have to give importance to our elders. We have to, everyone needs to be happy, everyone needs to have a role, and there is a lot of pressure. And if you're someone like myself who grew up in a largely individualistic society where you do things on your own, you keep things short, compact, and especially growing up away from a lot of extended family, this became quite overwhelming quite quickly. And I was lucky enough actually that my parents gave me and my husband a lot of autonomy in the decisions that were made and where we could weigh in and make our own way forward. And I got to choose, like I said before, what I wore, how things were done, vendors, what everything would look like, etc., etc. But there was also hills that as a couple we would not die on, and things like the guest list or the food or various things like that we did leave up to our parents because we trusted in their judgment and we trusted that they knew what they were doing and they were able to easily communicate with the people on the ground. And so it was a balancing act. Actually, if you think about it, for us, it was like God was already there before us and he had already planned it out, and all we needed to do was go with him. Because if he is the author of your story, no matter what cultural expectation comes your way, what family pressure, what expectation, any of those things doesn't even matter, because if he has written your story, he has also written the end of your story and the middle of your story and all the ups and downs of the narrative that you are going to go through in your life. And so he is already there and he knows and he already has a way forward, and all we have to do is go to him. Another thing that really helped us as a couple is to stay on the same page as a couple. It meant having constant conversations about what we were feeling, what was going on, and making sure that we were not neglecting meeting together, and having a strong anchored viewpoint about what we wanted and us being together on the same page, so that if there were things that came our way and if there were disagreements, that we were really strong in what we wanted and in what we knew that God wanted to do with the wedding. And this really helped bridge the gap between a lot of the things that were going on, and it helped us stay anchored. And we did fight, there were arguments, there were a lot of things that went south, but if we could stay anchored to God, if we could stay anchored with the people that really, really mattered, if we could pray together and stay strong and true in God, then it didn't matter what happened outside. It didn't matter the chaos that was going on. And Indian weddings can be a lot. And sometimes everyone is so bogged down again in what an Indian wedding should look like and what people are thinking and the dreams and expectations that everyone has, and getting married in a different country and actually even getting married in the country that you grew up in. All of these things can happen. So pray together, communicate with each other, take time to really listen to each other, and equally take the same amount of time to give things to God, if not more. And that's the privilege, I guess, of having Jesus and having him as an anchor. And that is why it is an Indian Christian wedding, because our faith can inform our culture and our faith can inform the challenges that we might face as a result. So I really hope you enjoyed the video today. It was a little bit of a ramble. It was a little bit all over the place, but I really hope that you were able to find points that you've been able to relate to, or that you've been scared of with decisions that are coming up. And I really, really hope and pray that you will keep God at the center of your own wedding, and that this may be a source of inspiration for you. So let me know in the comments which point you related with the most, or which points you are most scared of or are challenged by. Let me know the things that maybe helped you out as well. I will see you in the comment section, and until my next video.